What's up, dog? Cheers. Hope you're doing well, man. I know I can always count on can always count on Anton to respond to one of my mid morning Trump texts. You always gotta have those people you can message at like weird times of the day or night, and they don't get pissed off. They just like respond. Like I can message Anton any time of the day or night. What's up, Mac? There we go. The homie.
Yes.
Yo, what up? What up?
What's up, Matt?
Man, I think Instagram's mad at me, dude. I don't know what happened.
What now?
I tried to comment on our post, and it said that I'm banned from commenting until June 27th. And I'm like, oh, what did I do? I ain't said nothing.
That's a new one. That's a new one. I haven't seen that. Yeah, they just banned me. They don't really tell me anything. They don't really give me any I'm gonna see if I can keep a page up longer than a year. It would be a record. It would be like 2020 is probably the last time I had a page up for longer than a year.
Yeah, man.
And yeah.
Yeah, no warning, no you did something wrong. You know, I don't make hateful comments or anything, so I don't understand why they would ban my comment.
Dude, I've gotten in trouble. Like, I've had a post get flagged, and then they say I couldn't go live.
Bro.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm telling you, I'm good.
Doesn't make any
I am
sense.
gonna look. I was watching King AK-47's YouTube live last night. That motherfucker, dang it, I cussed. That dude made $2,000 just by people donating, bro. Like in an hour, I was like, yeah, this shit was gonna sell. this shit.
Yeah, I mean, dude, we really should. The problem is I've got like my YouTube page has like 200 followers, so it's like, I mean, it's just we got to build it one way or the other, here, there, whatever. But yeah,
Sure.
I'm at that point where I'm about tired of just dealing with it, man. It doesn't make any sense. Like,
At this point, man, somebody please produce an app for us cannabis people, man. At this point.
yeah, we should move this to YouTube. We really should. I mean, just because it's like, I don't know. The whole thing is, like, with YouTube, we just don't. It comes down to, like, just initially putting in front of people, like getting in front of people.
The algorithm.
And yeah, it's just a matter of doing it. It's not that hard.
It's not, man. Because I mean, think how many times we've gone to YouTube for advice or whatever the case may be. You know what I mean? Or just because I hate TV, so everything I do is pretty much cannabis. So I just go to YouTube and watch cannabis.
I don't watch like network TV anymore. I don't know who really does, man. Like, yeah, everything. If I watch these, and I'm even at a point with the streaming services where I'm not even watching most of that stuff anymore. And Netflix, maybe once a month, maybe I'll find something to watch, but like, it's like a lot of what I'm watching these days has been like YouTube content, or like, if I even have time, sit on and play Xbox. But like, I just, whatever.
Sure. Dude, I know this is off topic, but how was the Diablo?
It's awesome.
Yeah, is it?
Yeah, it's awesome. Yeah, it's awesome.
Is it reminiscent of the nostalgia it gave you playing on PC?
It reminds me a lot of the other games, like the other ones in the series. It's not like drastically different, but yeah, I can't seem to put it down. I can't.
Nice.
I started a character, and then I kind of realized it wasn't really the best class for like the end game. So I got like halfway through leveling it up, and then started a second one, and now I'm playing that one. But yeah, it's gotten most of my free time lately, to be honest.
So it sounds like it is very reminiscent of PC. Starting a character and then I don't like it.
Yeah, it wasn't that I didn't like it, because I really liked the character that I started with. I just kind of found out they weren't as good for like the end game stuff, like the late game stuff, which, to be fair, the differences are kind of negligible from class to class. Like, it's a little different, but like, I don't know. It's not the end of the world. I should have just kept playing with the one I had, but I was like, I don't know. I got in my head about it, and then I started another character, and now I'm playing that.
What's your favorite character to play?
See, that's tough, because like with this one, the Necromancer was a lot of fun, because you get like 10 extra dudes to help you fight. Like, you're just summoning like skeletons and all this crazy stuff. But then apparently their damage isn't really like they don't take a lot of damage. So like it's usually you're making your minions fight for you, and then you're kind of just staying back and just throwing spells and stuff like that. And so apparently they're not really great for like the late game, kind of like past the midway part of the cap. And so that's why I started a barbarian, which is just a tank. It's just a tank. And so it's been funny, because the tank in the early game was significantly harder to level up. Like, it was kind of weird, because like I got maybe halfway to where I was before, and I was like, I feel like I'm putting in twice as much work. And when you start a second character, you start with like certain upgrades that you've already got. So like the number of potions that you have, you carries over. So I started with like 9 potions with my second character. And normally you'd only start with like 3 or 4, and then you have to build that up and build it up and build it up. And like, even with that advantage, I found myself going back to town like every few seconds. And it was just like, God almighty, I feel like I'm working too hard for this.
All right, I got one more question for you, and we're going to get into the show. It kind of pertains. What's your favorite strand to smoke while gaming?
That's tough, because really, as long as I'm just high, I'm happy. But I did happen to find the other day, so I'm a big Primus fan. I've been listening to Primus since I was a kid. It's like really bass heavy, but it's kind of wild. And I've seen them 6 or 7 times live, but I did come to find that Primus makes really good music for playing Diablo too. But yeah, past that, anything that just, as long as I'm baked, I'm good.
Yeah, same here. Now, I found out today that I can't dab and play the game. I suck, but
I thought
that's another topic.
It's long determined you're not really great at dabbing and doing anything. Just dabbing in general.
Dabbing, yo. I don't know if I should tell that story. That's kind of like, I sound like a stang when I tell that story. But yeah, anyway, yesterday, or day before yesterday, bro, I hit the dab, and something just made me inclined to get on the floor, because I was high as shit, right? I just got on the floor. And then whenever I fucking came down, bro, when my eyes focused, I was looking at my wife, and she looking at me like, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "Yo, I just left."
Like, did you just hear what the cabinets just said to me? It's ridiculous. Did you hear what the cabinets are talking shit? Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
It's hilarious, bro.
Hey, man, sometimes you just got to do what you got to do to get through it. But, yeah, those dabs sound like they're kicking your ass down there. Y'all are dabbing, like, dispensary hash?
Dispensary concentrate, yeah. Yeah, it's just, I guess it's fire, it made me completely leave. Like, so,
yeah. Yeah, if you don't dab a lot, you just dab kind of casual. It's the same thing with edibles. Like, if you don't eat them a lot, and then you just kind of get on it one day, yeah, it'll humble you real quick, man.
Bro.
And I've had so many people tell me, like, man, I smoke, like, you don't understand. Like, I'd be blazing, and I'm like, it's not quite the same, man. Like, just because you blaze a lot of weed doesn't mean this is going to work for you and it's going to be all right. Like, mind your tone. Like, this shit will humble many a man. Like, just be careful. Yeah. There's always that, like, nah, I got it. And I'm like, all right.
bro.
Your life, I can only tell you, I can only give you,
Your life to
this
live.
feel. Like it's your, this rest of your day that's going to get ruined, not
Oh
mine.
man, I know.
I could dab all day. I could dab all day long, and I'm good. Like it doesn't, doesn't
Hey,
faze
Super
me.
Rich, you bet not say nothing in the comments, son, because you know I done seen you upside down. So you better not. Shout out Super Rich, man.
No, it's
But yeah,
good.
so what are we talking about? We're talking about what? Seeds
Yeah,
and
yeah,
the
man. We were going to talk about seeds. We were going to talk about collecting seeds, just kind of seed storage, what to look for, what are you trying to find, what are we doing, why do you have this terrible addiction, why does it seem like it won't go away?
it gets
You've gone,
worse.
you've done everything you can, and you keep charging shit to your Venmo and to your fucking PayPal, and you're
Wife
like,
threatening
I don't
to
really know
leave
what
you.
else to do. It
All
just
type
keeps
of
happening.
all type of crap, man. You put it all on the
You're like,
line for seeds.
my wife's leaving me because I spent 300 grand this year on seeds, and I don't know what to do, and nobody wants to buy them now.
Bro, I think we all been in that I'll buy these seeds and it's gonna take me to the top type ordeals, you know?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and it's so funny that like it's all it happened to all of us. Like it's a joke because those of us that have been bitten by the bug, it really is bad, and you find yourself like compulsively buying seeds, and you see a strain and you just can't not buy it, and you're like, But the thing that made me think about doing seeds was I kind of thought to myself the other day. I had this moment where I was like, I realized there's kind of two different camps of people. There's people that kind of buy particular breeders, and then there's people that tend to buy particular strains, right? And maybe you fall into both categories in some Venn diagram, but I find a lot of people like they either find breeders that they really love and they stick with those breeders and they tend to run whatever those breeders do, or there's people that, like for me, when I'm buying seeds, there's definitely breeders that I like to work with or breeders that I prefer to buy from, but I'll buy a strain just because it's a strain that I love quicker than I will because it's a
It's a name.
breeder that I'm into. You know what I'm
It's a name.
saying?
No,
Yeah.
for sure. I totally agree, man. When I search for seeds at this point in my cannabis journey, I search for what I'm looking for, what's been on my mind, what I can't stop thinking about. I don't care if Joe Blow has it or Capulator has it.
Yeah,
I
right.
want it. So that's when you get into the passion of things, and it's not just you're growing just to put a seed in the ground, but you're actually growing for direction and purpose.
Yeah. And I mean, like I said, for me, it's always a flavor thing. Like I'll see two strains together, and in my head, I'll immediately think of like what those two strains together taste like. And that's what sells me on a strain every time. And I always say, like, before I was a breeder, before I ever like bred seeds on a level past just like for fun, I was a seed buyer. I've been buying seeds for 20 years. I've been trading seeds forever, and it's one of those things that, like, early on it was necessity because I didn't have access like we have today where you can go online and buy hundreds and thousands of dollars worth of seeds of your favorite breeders and
Right.
collect them like baseball cards.
Right.
Like, there weren't a ton of seed options when I first got into seeds. And so once I had access like that, once I had access to like different flavors and different breeders and different this and that and the other, I just went crazy. Like I stacked them like there was bomb was gonna go off and we were gonna run out of
No,
them. Like
for sure.
it gets to be a problem for real quick.
I've been collecting seeds now. I would say collecting for about maybe 8 years now, and just the amount of seeds that I've amassed in that amount of time is ridiculous. Like they've traveled with me from cross country to cross states, all type of shit that some I've just kept with me. And someone asked in the chat, they asked if I have any relic seeds. I guess that's opinionated. what do you consider relic seed? You know, because to
To
me,
me, if I was asking you, just knowing like the little bit that I know about where you've traveled and things like that, I would ask you, where's that North African? Where's that Morocco? Like, if you spent time in Spain, like the first thing I'm asking is like, you
I,
know, where's that old world hash plant from that North African, like literally Moroccan, like all that stuff that you get in Europe is all from like either Afghan, you know, or the kind of Morocco, North Africa area, or
no, for
Amsterdam.
sure. Yeah, so when I was living in Spain, I had a Gromy that was living in Africa, Morocco to be exact, and he had an African landrace sativa, and unfortunately I gave it away because, you know, I don't really like long flowering plants, and I felt like someone else could do it just as more or be satisfied with it more than me, so I blessed somebody else with it, you know.
That's
But
how I am with that stuff too, bro. Like I would say like the round that I'm kind of working towards right now is probably the most sativa leaning stuff that I've done. It's like gassy OG stuff like that. Excuse me. Anything past that, I don't have the time for it. And I'll just tell you, like people want to send me stuff all the time. They're like, I've got this land race, I've got that, I've got this sativa, and I'm like, listen, man, they're just gonna sit in my seed box because it's not my thing, and it would have to be a cold day when I've get around to just doing nothing but sativas. And I'm just being honest. I don't want you to waste your seeds, and I don't want them to just go to waste. I don't run a lot of sativas.
But again, what's relic to you or another girl might not be relic to me. Like what's relic to me is my Mendo dope that I've been sitting on for years because I know it has the locomotion and that's from Subcool and I respect the Subcool. So those seeds I just keep sitting on and sitting on and sitting on. So
pop that shit because you get sit on it too long, you're gonna realize it doesn't pop anymore.
No,
that's the problem we've all gotten into is we're like, nah, man, I want to save this for that time and that special place and then you finally go to pop them 4 years, 5 years later, and you get 2 seeds and you're just like, dude, why did I wait? Why did I do that? Like, yeah, pop them shit. If you got seeds. If it sounds like something you want, if you got the time and the space, make time and space. Like, do it. Because we all do that, too. We hoard these things, and then in our head, we're like, well, I got that for a rainy day, or if I get bored, or just in case, or, and then you kind of finally throw more shit on top of it, more shit on top of it. And before you know it, you've bought so many seeds you can't run. And that one thing that you were kind of into back in the day, you got 10 things now that seem so much more interesting,
for sure.
That's another thing we got to talk about. Somebody said freeze them. I'm not a fan of freezing seeds. I'm not a fan of putting your seeds in the refrigerator or the freezer. It's just not my thing. They're too moist. There's too much moisture in the exchange of taking them in and out. It's just one of those things. Like, I see a lot of people do it, and a lot of people preach on it about long-term storage and this, that, or the other. Generally, cannabis seeds are good. They're going to be good for about 10 years before you start to see noticeable, significant decline if they're big, healthy seeds. So it's like putting them in the freezer, the number one thing that you want to avoid with seeds is moisture. So like if we're putting them in the fridge and then taking them out of the fridge, in that exchange, there's moisture. Even if you just keep it in your fridge forever, when you go to take them out, now they're getting moist. So it's like you really get into this whole, like, is long-term storage that much more beneficial in a fridge or a freezer? I haven't really found that to be the case. I've generally found that if you can just keep them dry, keep them cool, especially when you got a seed collection like mine, I would need 2 whole freezers. I would need a deep freeze, like a big deep freeze for that.
So,
like
when I was communicating with I think it's AK Brains, if I'm not mistaken, when I was in Spain.
AK Bean Brains, yeah.
Dude, he showed me his freaking refrigerator, bro. And he opened it, and I'm, where's the vegetable? No food, no water, no vegetables, just entirely filled with seeds.
I could justify that if I were doing solventless. Like if I were making water hash, I could justify that. I can't justify it for seeds.
No way. And then Nate from the bakery, he has a freezer full of just different pollens that he's collected over the years, man. I think
The
that is
pollen
so dope.
you definitely want to keep in the freezer, but once again, that transfer, man, that transfer moisture, when you got to inevitably pull it out and use it. So what I would do with the pollen is I would put it into like a Mylar. After it was in like a vial, I would put the vial in a Mylar. And so that way it's a little less of a problem when you pull it out of the fridge.
Yeah.
You do still want to make sure it's at room temperature before you open the package up and deal with it.
Yep.
But see, that's the whole thing is like, with even pollen, when you pull some out, if you try to put it back, you've done some damage there, one way or the other. Just that in shifting the temperature of it.
Yeah.
You know, like
You got to
pollen
think
is
what
so
freezing is.
finicky.
Yeah, you got to think what freezing is. Freezing is water turned into ice, right? So obviously, you know that there's some condensation, some type of moisture there. Honestly, though, I've had success with reusing pollen that I freeze. You know, I just make sure that I package it really well and put it back in there. Now, I have noticed each time I reuse it and take it out and use it that there's a decline in seed production, definitely.
Yeah.
But it can be stored long time, you know, if you handle it correctly.
And it's kind of like I always say with pollen, it's like a one-shot thing. So if you're going to put it in the freezer, leave it in the freezer until you're ready to use it. Pull it out and use it. Don't try to put it back after that, because to be honest, you're gonna damage it to the point where what little bit might be viable is at that point not really going to be worth it to fight over. You know, like you're just going to throw dust on your plants and then realize they didn't seed. So it's like with pollen, it's a little bit different, but with seeds, I mean, if you're literally just going to throw them in the fridge or freezer, not touch them for 2 years, 3 years, and they're just going to sit, then I could justify it. But like if you're going to pull them out and need to use them at any point in between, it's just better to just keep them somewhere in a tote or somewhere that, you know, away from any moisture, and just keep them away from heat. And they'll keep for, like I said, really a decade. 7 to 10 years is about the point where you start to see some drop off in your seed viability, even if they're healthy seeds. And then you just get into like, if they're smaller, unhealthy seeds or something that's not perfect, they're usually not going to 5 years maybe, you know, if you're lucky.
I've had success with seeds over 5 years, just keeping them in Walmart little clear container, you know, multiple containers, and then keep them in my closet in the dark. You know, as long as, like I said, you keep them away from moisture, you keep them away from heat, and leave them in the dark, they'll be just fine. Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah, the fluctuation of temperatures with the freezer gets me. I'm not a big fan of that. The moisture thing is kind of another one. If you have volume of seeds, like if you're breeding and you just have hundreds of thousands of seeds, then, you know, I could justify, you know, if you're putting them up for years and you just want to pack them away for a rainy day, then yeah, I mean, I could see that. But like just for your general collection, I usually don't recommend people put their seeds in the fridge or freezer.
In the commercial environment, how do they store their seeds?
In the dirt. Yeah, I mean, to be fair, if you're commercially producing seeds, you're usually selling them before you ever need to do that, before you really need to worry about that. It varies by person, right? Most commercial grows I've ever worked in, if they've dealt with seeds at all, because most of them just deal exclusively with cuts. They'll get cuts in metric and then just run cuts, and that's it. The few places that I fucked with that actually dealt with seeds would buy, you know, thousands of dollars of seeds at a time and then just run them all at once. Whereas like commercial seed vendors, people that make seeds, it kind of varies by person, you know?
Yeah.
It's one of those.
I guess you told me countless and countless of time that in production environments, time is money. So yeah, I guess they would start from clone instead of seed, no doubt.
Yeah, and it's just like what eventually happens is most newer places just want to get grows going, just want to get plants cycling, just want to get flower on the shelf. So most of the time they're not really thinking about Like, let's take a risk and run some seeds so we can have some better strains. Most of them, if they do that, will just pay another dispensary to do it or pay another grow to like do the seed hunting and all that stuff. And there's even places like, depending on what state you're in, there's nurseries and like places that just sell cuts of exotic strains or, you know, whatever's hot on the market at the moment. And places like dispensaries don't have to do all that pheno hunting and dealing with all that, because like you said, it's money.
Yeah.
It's even different when you have to tag all those plants that are eventually just going to get run out, you know, seeded.
Yeah.
There's tons of, it's a whole different thing producing seeds within metric, because you're not harvesting flower and they're not used to that. Like, that's not, the whole of metric is largely set up for the production of flower and then, you know, dealing with hash and stuff like that. The seed stuff, even in Denver, the last time I was in a metric system, there's a lot of things that how the seeds get into the system was always kind of vague.
Right.
How you're supposed to get new strains that aren't already in the system was kind of a gray area. And then just like the production and handling of seed within the system, I'm sure that's changed to some degree, but it's still not at the level of like hash production because there's so few commercial metric seed producers.
Right.
They exist, surely. There's a few of them, but it's just not what most people are doing within metric, you know?
Right. So I got a question, man. I guess it's a statement made by, I can't say the name, War Gunner. He said, I have some late 80, some type of cultivar, right? So late 80s weed, and I'm speaking out of pure ignorance, tends to not be as good as what we're getting now, right? So what would it be like germinating something from the 80s and growing it out?
That might be a hot take. I'm sure there's some old timers out there that would love to argue with you about that one, about the quality of the weed from the 80s to today.
And I'm speaking out of ignorance because I've never grown anything from the 80s or anything.
The reality was, it wasn't really until the 90s that you started to see kind of an explosion of indoor grows, of like kind of indoor growing as a whole. The strains from the 80s, I would still say were a lot of like your older, almost landrace type varieties that people were still like maybe just beginning to hybridize on some level, because that had been happening through the 60s and 70s. People bringing back stuff from other parts of the world, Northern California and things like that, and starting the hybridization process. I will say they were a lot more simple in profile back then. Like the variety of flavors and just the insane explosion of different tastes and things like that is somewhat new. Like there were definitely some flavors, but it wasn't like today where you had tens of thousands of people breeding seeds and, you know, people even in their own grows and people at home. There's so many people breeding now. That's new. That's pretty new.
Yeah. That's intriguing to me, man. I would love to pop some, you know, because it's almost like going back in time. Since I didn't get a chance to experience, you know, the early 80s genetics, man, hey, if anyone's watching this or ever watched this, man, contact me if you have some verified 80s genetics. You know, I just want to be
very clear. I just want to be very clear about something because I don't think this has been said yet. And it's definitely not said enough. Any seeds that came out of weed from the 1980s are not going to germinate today. It's not going to happen. So if you've got your dad's stash or your great granddad's weed seeds or, you know, whatever it is, the reality is that after 10 years, your germination numbers are so low that you'd be lucky to get a plant or two. So when we're talking about something even from the 90s,
right,
you would be lucky to get plants to germinate at all. And then when you go even further back than that, when we get into the 80s and the 70s and you're talking about such a distance that I just don't think it's feasible. And I don't
Right.
even know that with modern science and the ability to do like embryo extractions and certain things with tissue, I still don't think you're going to take, weed seeds that were sitting in your pops's nut sock. Like I don't think I hear it all the time, man. Listen, man, I found these seeds. My pops got
Yeah.
these skunk seeds. We're about to do a skunk revival project. We're about to put it. The whole world's about to see my granddad's heirloom skunk, and then if they get plants, this story goes the same way every time. If they get plants, they're literally just these disgusting little, like, they don't go anywhere. If you get something to germinate and get lucky to get a plant, they almost always herm. There's so much to those old genetics that,
Yeah.
like, while valuable, you need numbers. You need numbers to be
No.
able to find anything valuable.
I just want to taste it, to go back to the 80s and see what,
That's
my
the problem.
mom and them was smoking.
That's the problem, man. Is like most of the weed back then didn't have crazy expressions like we have today.
Right.
Most people knew weed as just whatever came by back then. It wasn't like today where you had tons of people that are connoisseurs and are dealing with tons of seeds and tons of genetics. It was a very niche thing, even growing weed in the 80s.
Right.
It was super niche, and it's just one of those things that, like, anybody that tells you they got seeds that are older than, man, I'll just throw a dart, 2000. Anybody that tells you they got seeds older than 2000 that they're popping and they're just getting sprouts out of, they're probably lying to you. They're probably bullshitting, and they're probably not going to go anywhere because those stories all end the same. Those people never end up with this new skunk line that everybody's buying, and, like, it's just not, That's the other thing, was that so few people, somebody just said, we just called it weed. There were so few people growing their own weed back then that most of what most people smoked was just weed. It was, it was a lot of Mexican brick weed. It was a lot of Canadian, whatever came up, from Canada. It was whatever we could get here in the United States. I'm not that old. I wasn't smoking in the 80s, but I'm kind of speaking hyperbolically in a sense that, like, before I started smoking weed, really, it was just weed. Most of the people didn't, unless you had some family in Northern California, or,
Right.
you just were in the real minority, or you just did a ton of concerts. Let's be honest. That's where all the best weed was at concerts.
I always started concerts. Every legend strand starts with a concert, man. With Grateful Dead.
That's my new gimmick. I'm only selling strains now that have a story that ties back to Dead Tour. So, like, if I release a new strain, you better believe it was blessed by a high wook priest under, like, a full moon on Jerry's birthday. On, just make that shit up. It sells. Nobody cares.
Yeah.
Let's be honest. Those chem guys have made a whole living off of making up stories about the Grateful Dead and tying it to their strains, and people are just like, "Oh my God, it's that strain from the Dead Tour," and it's like, nah, man, it's whatever, bro. Believe what you want. Just don't buy strains because of gimmicks.
The only old weed that I've came across, allegedly from the early 90s, is that B.A. Ganny cut that I ran across. That was stupid fire. Like, I've never had, like, a mothball super Newport menthol tasting plant, bro. That shit was fire, man.
Yeah.
It was the fire that no one wanted. It was like, it's too strong, or I don't like the taste.
That's all those heavy cushions, man. Everybody bitches out with the heavy when the cush comes out, and it's like anybody can smoke sativas during the daytime, but it's like not everybody can smoke kush all day long. That's a rare gift,
man. That kush is something else, man. When you get that right kush and you know it, it does take you. It does make you a little paranoid. Like, man.
No.
What the dope man
puts everybody to sleep. When I bust out the cuss, everybody just goes to sleep, and it's just like all those Afghans, all those Kushes, all those, like, most of the best indica strains were just heavy myrcene, and it's just like it's nap time in a bud, And as soon as we started smoking that shit, everybody just goes and takes a nap. And I'm like,
Hey,
wake the
here's a
fuck
dope.
up. Let's go. That's when I'm like at my best. I'm like, let's go get something done now.
Here's a dope question for you about seeds. What seed has just for some odd reason eluded you? You have not been able to find it.
Like, that's tough because when I was younger, when I first got into seeds, I would fixate on strains like that. Like I would be like, I'd see something online, or in the early days of the internet, or I would see something in a magazine. I'd be like, that would be cool to grow. Once I started growing my own on my own, I started to see so many seeds at a certain point that I just went, well, it's more about what do I have in front of me that I'm looking forward to. Like, I don't really get fixated on strains like that. Anything banana, I always say is something that I'll pop without asking many questions, and it's one of the few that I'll get in deep over some banana stuff, and then like realize it's just garbage. But like that's the one that catches me more often than not. But like I don't. Listen, if somebody had like a vintage collection, right, of like 2000 to 2005, Seed Bay, Breed Bay, IC Mag, stuff like that, like then there's a couple of strains from like back in the day that like there was this breeder named Outlaw Grower that was selling these double purple Doja crosses at one point. And I ran a double purple Doja mental floss of his that was just amazing. It was just amazing. But, like nothing. Like I've always kind of looked at seeds like I'd rather just make something new than chase something old. And just because we know what happened in the past, there's not something groundbreaking really. To be honest, it's sitting in the stuff that's already been done. Like, there's some good stuff there, and it's always solid in a breeding sense to go back to kind of older stock and stuff. But for me, like, I always kind of try to look forward and just, like, what can I make versus what can I find? What can I get? This and that.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't really chase strains like that anymore. Like there's a couple that got away. Like I had a purple Kush cut. I always joke that I got mites twice from, and the second time I knew I was doing it. Like it was just one of those that I loved that cut so much. But like even that, like I don't know. I feel like now to have that same strain, I would look at it and go, man, it's just not it. Like, we've moved so far from when I had that. And I've
Right.
seen so much weed since then that the scale has moved so much to what great weed is for me that like it would be hard to look at some of those older strains and be like, that's it. That's,
Yeah,
like
for
when I
sure.
look back on even strains I've worked with, I go, man, we've got so much terpier shit now.
Mine would be this strain I seen in the back of a High Times magazine 15 years ago. It was called
Blue
Top.
Dream? Is it called Blue Dream?
No, it's called Top 44.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
Haven't seen it. It's supposed to be one of the fastest flowering, and it's supposed to be stupendous for like scrog type growers. So really, if anyone has a cut of Top 44 or has ever seen it, let me know because that has completely eluded me. I don't see anyone talk about it or even bring it up in the conversation. But probably because it was an older strand and it really at the time for what it was a great plant. Maybe not as much now, but I still would like to incorporate some of that fast flowering,
Yeah, yeah,
but you
yeah.
could do that with autos, I guess. But I don't want an
Yeah, I
auto.
was gonna say,
What I'm saying?
I almost suggested autos. I was
Yeah.
like, I'll get my boy Earl on here, and he'll prophesize to you about the autos. He's probably on the chat right now, but we've been chatting a lot about autos and like trying to get some auto seeds made from some of my gear, which I'm not opposed to. I just don't want to have to do it myself. It's just like it's
Yeah.
one of it's not and it's not a lazy thing. It's just like I
No, it's
said,
definitely lazy.
I would
It's
hate to go
definitely lazy. Because,
into anything that I'm not
bro,
passionate about, and I don't want to waste my time on something that somebody else would have more fun with. You know?
when it comes to selecting autos, it's, in my opinion, it's very intensive because if you're not starting with two autos, then you really have to pay attention and select that
Just it's a
pheno
numbers game. It's
that's
just a
great.
numbers game. It's like
Oh, man,
breeding anything. It's
that's
just a
rough.
numbers game.
Tropicana poison flowers fast too. I've never heard of Tropicana poison, but yeah.
I will
So
say
I guess that would.
this: if you're looking for fast flowering strains, Afghans and Kushes are usually going to be your best bet, right? They usually tend to be about 8 weeks, 8.5 weeks. But anybody that tells you they got a strain less than 8 weeks that finishes in less than 8 weeks, once again, man, you're selling a brand of shit I
Dude,
don't need to buy.
that
Like, they
top
don't
44
finish that fast. It's
is
just not
52
necessarily the
days.
case. What's that?
If I remember correctly, what I really liked about the top 44, it was supposed to be like 52, 54 days.
Should give it 2 more weeks.
Definitely. Yeah. But again, like I
Yeah.
said, that was early 90s
It's
shit.
gonna
That
have
was,
you thinking it's gonna
don't
have you
buy that
thinking
hype.
it's ready at 53 days. But yeah, dude, it's give it 2 more weeks. Like
Man,
that's the truth.
I wish I
Any
had my,
plant
my
that's
computer
ready
next
at
to me.
53 days could probably take 2 more weeks without stress. You know, like it's just 60 days is kind of the marker. And I've seen thousands. I've worked with everything. Indoors, outdoors, everything. And I've never really seen anything that at 60, before 60 days, I was like, yeah, that's ready, chop it. Now, we've all talked ourselves into it. We've all been there and been like, bro, I'm out of weed. Them buds are looking thick. But it's like, nah, be honest with yourself. They're not ready. You're going to dry them. They're going to taste like hay. You know how this
Dude,
shit goes.
look at that comment, bro. M39 does
That's a
39
lot.
days.
39.
Man, 39 days. There's so much leaf matter
That
still there.
That's that beaster mentality of like they run in 39 days and it's like golf balls, like big nugs,
Man, I
but
gotta go Google that one.
it's garbo weed.
I'm definitely
Nah,
gonna go
man,
do my research.
nothing's done in 39 days. That's silly talk nonsense. That's
39
crazy.
days,
That's
bro.
absolute crazy talk. Nothing's done in 39 days. Yeah, 65 days is still pushing it. I still think it's like most strains for me, to be honest with you, at 60 days, if she's really giving you that eye that she's ready, I'm still going to proceed for like 2 more weeks. Like, I always tend to err towards letting it go a little bit longer
Nice.
because I actually like for weed to get me high versus you start pulling that shit early and it just doesn't get you all that baked because there's no THC and there's no terps. And it's like those last 2 weeks are so crucial in just oil production and, resin production and cannabinoid production that it's like cutting it early just sells yourself short. You wasted your time. Now you got something doesn't smell great and doesn't taste great. Why do
You know
it?
what, Baller? I don't know, man. 39 days, I feel like
That's
every
nonsense.
commercial grow
It's
on the
nonsense.
East and West Coast would be growing M39 if it was done in 39 days. Because,
Everybody in the country would be growing it.
yeah,
If
because
it finished in 39 days, it would be the hottest cut in America.
I can't. I want to rock with you, bro, but I can't do the 39 days, bro. I feel like that's something that, we lost the dodo bird, but I don't think
39
people
days, it
even,
hadn't even started stacking yet. Like, it's
bro.
producing pistols, but it hasn't even really started stacking at
Oh,
39
when did you
days.
start the clock? When did you start the flower
Yeah,
clock? Like
that's
3 weeks
true,
late?
too. That's true, too. When did you
Like,
start your timer? Because that's apparently, I didn't realize that is a very contentious thing within the cannabis community. The great debate. M30. I just read a text and I lost my train of
man,
thought.
somebody Google M39 and drop the link in the chat, dog.
Yeah, I just don't. I'm not saying
No, I
that
will.
somebody
Hold
doesn't.
on,
I'm not
I'm just kidding. I'm
saying.
pulling your leg. I
Yeah, I'm
definitely
not
go listen to it, though.
saying that people don't say that.
Yeah.
But I'm just debating whether at 39 days it's really finished or it's just got big enough buds that if you throw it in a commercial setting, somebody who doesn't really care is going to be like, we could pull it at 39 days. Like, fuck it. I don't give a shit. Yeah, but it's not. There's
I've
no
seen
way
a
it
lot of
produces
plants, man.
decent resin on 39 days. That's just, and I'm not arguing with the person that said that. I'm
Yeah.
arguing with the concept because it just sounds so silly. It just sounds
Yeah.
so silly.
But I'm definitely gonna look into it, man, because that's another relic cut that I want now with,
But if
39
I'm
days,
not
bro.
mistaken, isn't that the one? Is top
Hey, look,
44? Is
look.
it top 44 or is it M39? Which one is the one that they said was just the beast? Like when we used to get beasters in the early 2000s, it was these like huge nugs with tons of red hairs, but there was no resin and it was just big dense buds, and like it was junk. But we so much of it came and went. That's all I'll say. Just so
Ooh,
much, pounds and
that's what I'm
pounds
talking
and
about.
pounds of it
That's
came
what I'm
and went.
talking about.
And it's one of those things that like today we all just joke, and it was just if you didn't sell beasters, if she didn't sell beasters, she's too young for you, type of thing. But yeah, man, that was one of those. I think it's that's the M39. It was one of those strains that they would like those. If those plants were at 39 days, they were not done. They were not done.
Bro,
They were not done. Those buds were horrible. They were early. They never got anybody high. Do you know how many noobs I saw sit and smoke a whole blunt of that shit and be like, bro, I'm so faded. And I smoked the same blunt and I'm like, we ain't even high. Like, let's go get some weed.
nah, Exotic Alchemy. Before you jumped in, that's the strand that I said, the seeds that I said that is kind of coveted to me because I've never seen them, and you're the only person I actually heard, besides myself, mention Top 44. So shout out to Exotic Alchemy for even knowing Top 44. That's some old
It's
school
probably in one
back
of
in the
these canna
magazines
Bibles.
shit.
It sounds like one of these strains. It's in. I got like all of the canna Bibles and shit. Like it's probably in one of. It sounds like one of those old school strains. Like, but to be honest, man, none of those were strains that anybody talked about the flavor.
Mm-hmm.
Like there were definitely
Mm-hmm.
some. Like old school Northern Lights was really piney. There were people smoking OG back in the day. Skunk is another one, that had a really distinct profile. But so much of that stuff just tasted like weed,
Yeah,
or if
smart
it
man.
wasn't like the big transition that happened from back then to now is processing, curing, drying, like all of that. So much of that stuff was just Mexican brickweed. It was chopped down. It was baled wet. They just threw a fucking, enough saran wrap around it to get it into the States. And then if it was wet in the middle, they didn't care. And it's like now we know so much about handling weed and processing weed and drying weed and making hash, that it's an art form. And like there's so much of it in that respect that's changed that like the weed back then was also garbage because most people didn't know how to grow. Most people were growing, if they were growing, they were growing it outdoors. Indoor growing didn't really, on a decent to large scale, start to become a thing until really, maybe the late early 80s, early 90s.
Well,
I'm
think of
not
the
saying there were
pesticides that
people
people
doing
used
it,
to
but like
spray
it
on
just
it today.
wasn't big. What's that?
I said, think of the pesticides that people used to spray on it back then too. On top of that, I remember when I first started growing, I was using Miracle Grow. Didn't know any better. You know what I mean? So
I've
I can
known lots
only,
of people that did that. I've known lots of people that did
yeah,
that. Just went to like their local big box store and was just like, I don't really know what I need. I need dirt. I need soil. I need nutrients. I need, yeah. Hey, you live and you learn, man. Some of us smoked black fucking BHO we made with a fucking turkey baster. Like, like we've all done things and learned things. And the hope is that you learn from it and that you're more conscientious today and you make better decisions. And I know I do for sure. But like, like we all started somewhere. We all made mistakes. We all did stuff that like today we'd look
yeah.
back on and go, yeah, I wouldn't do that again. But like now you know. Tomorrow's paved with bad decisions of people from yesterday.
Hey, baller, that's another strand that I've always wanted to grow. Some real chronic too, man. So shout out to you for mentioning chronic. That's definitely something I want to try too. But yeah, early 2000 to 2010 had some great bud, man. I definitely agree with you in that sense, man. It was even in Texas, you know. In Texas, we known for brickweed, you know, just to be honest, in my opinion, you know, or at least where I was getting it from. But definitely 2000, 2010 had some fire bud come through. Juicy fruit, man. Okay, hey, Baller, I respect you, man. You know a lot of shit, bro, because those are, you naming all my favorite strands, man. That juicy fruit was some 2000, 2010 shit that was fire as hell. Huge buds. Yeah,
Yeah, I got
that
some
was
really good juicy fruit cuts from back in the day. You know, that really were like really heavy with the gum, like juicy fruit. Like
was it?
we used to have a strain. I
Yeah.
used to have a buddy that used to have a strain called Sticky Fruit. It was kind of similar profile, but a lot more like just nasty exotic fruit. Um,
Lovely.
but yeah, man, it's like the back for the longest time, if we saw great weed, it was on tour. Like we'd go to shows and concerts and stuff, and that was usually where we ran into like the best weed. Or I had a couple of traveling homies that just did like it was kind of a circuit. They would go up one side of the country chasing concerts, dropping off various substances. They would kind of do a bootleg and come back down the East Coast the other way, doing various concerts and picking up money. And it was just kind of a loop, you know, and you might catch them every couple of weeks. They'd drop off something new and exotic or 4 or 5 new and exotics. And, you know, and that, you know, that was like for the longest time, like that was other than going to shows, that was the only time I saw great weed, unless I grew it, you know, like that was it. Unless you grew it. And even then, once I started growing weed, it was a while before I had access to like tons of genetics. You know, like I grew bag seed, I grew whatever I could get my hands on. I had a skunk cut that caused a bunch of drama within my group of friends at one point because, like, man, this is a funny story. So, like, I started growing weed, and I had a friend that had shown me his grow. He was like, come check my grow out. And I'm like, okay, cool. So I see his grow, and he's growing this cut, and it's gorgeous. Like, it was absolutely, still to this day, I just remember the first time I saw it, and I was like, okay, now I get it. Like, these were like plants that were ready to come down, finished, gorgeous. But it was the skunk #1 cut. And so he gives me a couple cuts, and, you know, that started a huge love affair for me. And, like, it was one of my favorite strains that I grew. I think it was a skunk. I ended up finding out it was a skunk #1 of some sort. It wasn't skunky at all. It was very hashy, but it would finish, like, really short in a beautiful, just, like, you know, almost like a dome of just nug. And it was super resonance for the time, gorgeous strain, super hashy, super hashy. So I come to find out, I'm at a party one night, and I came to find out that the cut had actually come from the older brother of one of my good friends, right? That's not how I got it.
Yeah.
But that's how it had come to my friend that gave it to me. So we're at a party one night. Man, I feel bad telling this story because this is just. So we're at a party one night. And my buddy's brother that had brought the cut kind of came at me like as though I owed him something for a cut I had now been growing for like 6 or 7 years. And as far as I knew, I was the only person that still had it. And like, I mean, in that day's time, it was a beautiful cut, but today it would just get lost. You know, it reminded me a lot of like Sensi Star. It was really frosty, but just didn't have a ton of like terps or kick. You know, really good weed, especially when you don't have a ton of like access to a ton of different strains. Like, it was beautiful weed, but it wasn't like I now owe you a comeuppance 6 years later. When you didn't give me the cut, like, that was the whole thing, was like, they, for some reason, almost intentionally tried to keep it away from me getting it which
Yeah.
is hilarious
Yeah.
because I wasn't, like it was, they were trying to hoard it was the thing. It was kind of one of those, like they didn't want it to get out. And then I ended up with it. And it wasn't like, I didn't ask for it. I didn't pay for it. Like I just had a friend that was like, here, I'll give you a couple cuts of this. So I ran it. And then years down the road, they kind of came to me and were kind of like, hey, like, we feel like you owe us. So I gave him a handful of weed and I was like, here you go, dog. Like, we're good. I'm not sure what else
Wow.
yeah. But I mean, it was one of those that like it caused a little, I wouldn't say it's any lasting bad feelings, but like it was one of those things that like between a couple people I had known for some years, it was kind of funny the way it all kind of played out. And like,
That's sad though, man, 'cause the
yeah.
plant's definitely not about that, you know?
Yeah. And that's another one that like early on that really shaped kind of my view of like hype cuts and like just stuff that people want to validate, and like a lot of that sort of stuff just doesn't impress me because very rarely are they that impressive. Like let's be honest, when you see strange people are holding, like hoarding, and then I just go, man, I swear I can send you 20 seeds that look better than that right now. Like I don't know why you're holding it like it's God's gift to weed, but like there's very rarely live up to the hype. At least today. Like 20 years ago, OG Kush was some shit.
That's
20
it.
years ago, Girl Scout cookies was some shit.
Yeah.
But now it's just like, bro, we got better shit.
Hey, Wake Wizard, man. That's funny you mentioned. I'm actually working on a project now with G13. So, yeah, be on the lookout for that very soon.
Anyway, man, we got to wrap it up. We are at the end of the line. Where can people find you?
All right, you can find me. Well, you know where you can find me, man. You can find me on YouTube at Mr. Mac Blunts. You can find me on Twitch, same handle, Mr. Mac Blunts, The Real Mac Blunts on IG, and my Patreon at Mr. Mac Blunts. So tap in with me. I appreciate it as always, Turk.
Yeah, thank you, Mac. Man, they're always good, man. That one went by fast. They're always good when they go by quick like that. You always find a good thread, and it's like I think we're getting better at these by and by. Just the flow of, that's the best part about them. Anyway, think we're done with Father's Day sale. Turffiend.com. We are going to be doing June mystery bags, I think, at the end of this week. I'm going to dip into the vault, pull out some vault strains and kind of some older stuff, and we're going to probably put the biggest variety that we've put in any of these together. But yeah, turffiend.com for all your seed needs. Go find something. Check out directly with credit card on the website. No janky, no pay, no PayPal, no Cash App, no Bitcoin. You got all those. We can still talk, but like just go pay with your credit card. It's super easy. Anyway, Mac, we'll do it again next week. Peace.